This is Tracy Drummond. I am in Lady Lake, Florida with John Peterpaul. He was agreed to be interviewed for the IAM Oral History Project. Today is August 14th, 2012, and it is the afternoon. And welcome, Mr. Peterpaul, and thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for the Oral History Project.
You're very welcome.
Let's start with some basic background information. Where were you born and when?
Rome, New York, 1935.
And what were your parents doing?
My father was a factory worker. My mother was a housewife all her life because there were 7 children.
7 children.
6 boys and 1 girl.
Okay.
The oldest was the girl who's still around.
Okay.
She's just had August 9th, just had her 93rd birthday.
Okay. Well, happy birthday.
And my mother came from Krems, Austria. That's where she was born and raised. She immigrated into New York and joined her sister, where she met my father, who came from Italy.
Okay.
He fought during the First World War for the Allies. So those that fought for the Allies, they could get nationalized. They had a choice of 4 or 5 countries, and he chose the United States because he had a sister up in Utica, New York, and that's where they met. They got married and raised their family.
So Peterpaul doesn't sound like a very Italian
Well,
name.
it's not. It's the real name is Peterpaul.
Okay.
But for some reason, nobody can spell that. The P-I-E-T-R-O, and there's a big controversy. Is it P-O-L-I-O, P-O-U-L-I-O? And my father, something happened. They after they were here, because my sister and my oldest brother Pat, they talked fluent Italian because it was household. They moved to Utica when they got married. They were in Utica, New York, right in the middle of an Italian community, and so Italian was used all the time. So they became very fluent. Then they moved 20 miles away to Rome, New York, where the rest of us were born, and the other 5 children. And my father all of a sudden got Americanized.
Okay.
No Italian in the house or anything else.
And ironically, you moved to Rome and quit speaking Italian.
That's something.
Well, what is your rank in the lineup of kids?
I'm the baby.
You're the baby.
Mama's favorite.
Oh, Mama's, of course, the baby. I am also the baby. Always Mama's favorite.
And we're getting fewer and fewer. The only ones left, the boys, are myself and my brother Eugene, the one next in line to me, going up the ladder, and the oldest, my sister. So we're going from my oldest down to the bottom. Everybody in between has passed.
Okay. So your dad was a factory worker.
Yeah.
What did he in Rome?
At the General Cable Corporation. He worked there for between 40 and 45 years.
Okay. Was that an organized plant?
Yes.
It was? What union was your dad with?
He started out with IUE.
Okay.
And then the machinists come in and took him over.
Okay.
And so he was a machinist for years after they ran the IUE out, because the guy in charge of it was Mike Jimenez, who had a long reputation for fighting in the Spanish Revolution.
Oh, really?
In Spain, yeah.
I didn't know about that.
And he was president of IUE.
And they were more progressive, right? They were a little more, because this is before the AFL and the CIO merged.
Yeah.
So
it goes back a long time.
Yeah.
Because when a good friend of mine from the machinist organized that General Cable plant, and he went in and took over the IUE offices.
Okay.
And you should see the literature that was in that office. It was really fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean,
And none of it's still
really
around.
left-wing stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it was way out there.
No, they were very
But interesting.
left. Yeah. So, what was that like? Did you ever learn from your dad? Were they happy that the machinists came in and took over?
They were very, they negotiated some good contracts. Of course, initially it was a boom there. They had about 1,800 employees. And then as they started getting involved up there and it became the Rust Belt, cut back. All the plants up there, it was Rome was a great city for light industry. You had General Cable, Rome Cable, Revere Brass and Copper, Alcoa. You had all these small factories there. And slow but sure, all of them are gone now, except Revere Brass and Copper, which has a very minimal workforce. And I really don't know what they're making there, if it's the pans or the tubing division. But it's one or the other.
Okay.
Because they moved most of their operation to Ohio a long time ago, consolidated.
So your mother moved here from Austria.
Yep.
And did your father move here from Italy, or was he first or second generation?
No, he moved from Italy.
So both your parents immigrants to the United States.
Yeah.
And from two, I think, very different parts of Europe.
Okay.
So how did that come together in the household?
Well, my mother was a very, very intelligent woman. I mean, when she came here, she could talk, of course, German, English, and French. At like 17 years old, she could talk 3 languages. And then when she got thrown into that Italian community in Utica, New York, she learned very fast how to talk Italian.
Okay.
You had to survive.
Right.
I mean, you know.
Right.
And so,
Well, and so she was educated.
very highly so. Very
And was she from a working class family, or maybe a more middle class family?
highly. It was more of a middle class family, but it was typical European, you know, especially Austria. It was a very highly educated society even way back then.
Okay. So why did she choose to come to America?
Well, she had a sister here.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, you know, I can't really recall ever having that dialogue of why.
Mm-hmm.
I know she had come here once before and visited her aunt in Rockaway, Long Island for a short period of time and then went back. Then when she came again, she went and stayed with her sister.
Okay.
So she had a little bit, not a lot, but she had a little bit of roots here.
Okay. Do you know how your parents met?
No.
No. No.
Listen, I heard all kinds of stories, but everybody denies everything. You know?
Right. Okay.
My only one that probably really recalls is that my older sister, and she always uses it as a joke, especially with my father, you know, to kid him. So I wouldn't know what to believe there if I could remember.
Okay. So 7 kids.
7 kids.
Growing up in Rome.
Yep.
You said there was a lot of industry there, so there were a lot of unions there.
Well, yeah.
And was it a very union-friendly neighborhood you grew up in?
Yeah, the whole city was
Okay.
pretty union-friendly.
Okay. And so what was your education like? And was it important to your parents? Well, I'm sure with your mom, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
That you get an education. All of you,
Yeah.
all 7 of you.
Well, right after high school, see, I went right in the Navy.
Okay.
So I didn't have that choice of education beforehand because it was either me joining and going to the Navy or getting drafted.
Okay.
And the Vietnam War. And in fact, I created a controversy for going to the Navy because...
No,
here
Korea. It would have been Korea.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But I had 5 brothers, all Marines. And I was the traitor. I went to the Navy, and they used to kid me about it. I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Look, watch TV. You see all those guys running around in the snow, you know, up to their waist and stuff, cold, freezing over there in Korea." I said, "I don't want that." So I went in the Navy, and that's more or less where I got my profession.
Okay.
Because I went to school in the Navy, was on the seaplane tender, and worked on aircraft and stuff, and got my start there, really.
Okay. Well, let's go back a little, though, to elementary school and high school. Did you have a pretty ethnically mixed neighborhood in Rome?
It all depends what section of the city you lived in.
Okay.
If you lived in East Rome, you were an Italian.
Okay.
And you lived in South Rome, you were Polish.
Okay.
You lived in West Rome, you were a little bit of a mixture. And West Rome was the Jewish community, middle class, Germans, a little mixture in West Rome.
Mm-hmm.
West Rome was really where the people from East Rome and South Rome sort of, gravitated a little bit because the housing was a little bit better and stuff like that. But if you were in North Rome, you were a WASP.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that was the elitist neighborhood.
Okay.
All stone houses and all of that.
Okay. And did they own or manage a lot of the industry that was in the area? Was that kind of where the
No, it
owners?
wasn't local owned.
Okay.
Most of the light industry there was major corporations.
Okay. But those would have been maybe lawyers, business people.
Oh yeah, like the guy that had the Cadillac Oldsmobile garage, Stoops was his name. He had a place there, and people like that. They business people that were in the upper class.
Okay. And so, which part of Rome did y'all live in?
We lived in the west side of Rome.
The Italian part.
No, just over. East Rome was the Italian part.
Okay.
When my mother and father moved from Utica, they moved to East Rome. And then after a couple of my other brothers were born, we moved to West Rome. And that's where I was born and raised. Really was in West Rome.
Okay. And growing up, though, you had a diverse mix of kids at your school?
Oh yeah, very much so. It was a different world back then.
Mm-hmm.
There was like you take a grammar school, about every third block in the city they all looked alike. There was a big square building, 3 stories high, and that was the grammar school from kindergarten up to, I think, 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in the because there was no buses or anything. You all walked. So most you walked was probably 3 blocks, maybe 4 blocks in some situation, into your neighborhood school. And then we had a couple Catholic schools. We had Transfiguration was in the Polish part of town. That was a Catholic school. St. Mary's had a Catholic school, and I don't know if St. Peter's had one or not, but they were very small Catholic schools. I mean, the public schools were the big thing.
Right. And then high school, same thing, all local.
High school, yeah, there was 2 junior high schools, and 1 senior high school. Of course, that's all changed now. Now, when you go up there, all those schools are all gone. And where we had that big Griffiths Air Base that used to employ, 20-some thousand people, that was a SAC base. And after they closed up and everything, then now there's a school up there that when I first saw it, I didn't believe it. The most monstrous school I've ever seen. It's got to cover several acres.
Mm-hmm. Is it like a high school?
It's a high school, junior high and senior high. It's a mixture of both. And everybody's bused. I mean, there's no schools in the city no more. So everybody's bused onto Griffiths Air Base. Well, it ain't that now. They call it some kind of corporate center or something, but right at the very fringe. And that's where everybody goes to school.
And as a kid, did you get odd jobs in the neighborhood?
No, because summertime was baseball time.
It was baseball time.
Yeah.
Did you play baseball at school, like with the?
We played baseball at school, but the most fun was American Legion.
American Legion.
Yeah, that was the most competitive. You were statewide. They played the championship in the state in Lockport, New York, down the road, and that was the best of it all.
Okay. And you played?
Yeah.
Through high school?
Almost all the way through. The last year in high school, I had to pay a little bit more attention to some things because I thought I was a big athlete with my football, and the one I really fell in love with was hockey. So I was playing a lot of hockey, and that was tough because I was the only Italian kid that played hockey. Hockey was that sport from North Rome where all the WASP were.
Right.
So here comes this little Italian kid from downtown area, West Rome, and to play their hockey. So. But that used to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I used to play every night.
Really?
Well, in that city back then, now you got these enclosed ice rinks.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, every park, every recreation facility The biggest one, because they had 3 tennis courts. So come wintertime, they had 4 tennis courts, I think it was. 2 of them they used to freeze and use them for people to skate on. And the other 2, they used to put boards around them and make hockey arenas. And every night they had pickup hockey there.
Okay.
So you got your stick and your skates and your shin guards and gloves, walked up to Franklin Field and played hockey.
Did it have the reputation then that it does now of being a violent sport?
They used to control it pretty good.
Okay.
I coached my son when back in Maryland when I was in Washington D.C. and my son was playing hockey for his high school, and that I helped. There was one guy coaching, and I helped him coach because when I was in town, because they used to rent the rink up the road in Columbia. They used to rent that rink from like 10 to 11 at night, and they liked that because the guy that had the Zamboni that cleaned the ice, he used to let him stay there till 12.
Okay.
So they had 2 hours of ice time to practice.
Okay.
And so I used to go up there and help them. And that was some of the most dangerous hockey around.
Really?
Well, because those kids, you're talking about, high teen kids. You're talking about kids running 16, 17 years old. They really can skate. I mean, now they're coming into their own. But they're fearless. And you combine the two, a kid that can skate so well and he's fearless, that's nothing but trouble in the hockey rink.
Mm-hmm.
I think I played 1 or 2 scrimmages with him. I wouldn't go back in the ring with those kids.
Well, what was expected in your family after high school? What was expected of the kids? What did your parents expect you to do once you graduated?
Well, my mother was always pushing to go to school. My brother Charlie went to college. My brother Gene did. After they got out of the military, the GI Bill. She wanted me to do that, but I was fascinated with airplanes.
Okay.
So I had my GI Bill. And
after the military.
After the military.
Yeah, and how long were you in the Navy?
4 full years.
4 full years. And where were you stationed?
When I went in, I went to Bainbridge, Maryland, to boot camp. After that, I went on a ship in Little Creek, Virginia, and after that, I was always on a ship.
Okay, so just wherever the ship
wherever.
went. Yeah, okay.
And the most time, I started out on a repair ship initially for several months, and then I went on to the seaplane tender. When I got my grading, I went on to the seaplane tender, and I spent most of my time there.
Okay. What was expected of your sister? Because you're talking about what all the boys were doing, but what was expected of your sister?
I could never answer that. My sister is probably she's a big woman. She's got a complexion like a baby's rear end at 93. Very boisterous. She is what she had to be with 6 boys.
Right. And being the oldest and getting
being
y'all
the
to
oldest, yes. She was like a mother. She still thinks she's my mother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but she got married at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know what she did when she got out of school and everything else.
Okay.
I can't go back that far and remember that.
Okay.
But,
but you went into the Navy,
Yeah,
and you were a mechanic and seaplane tender. What does
on a seaplane tender.
On a seaplane tender. So, what kind of work did you do? What was your day-to-day?
Work on seaplane. Well, and a lot of it was on an example. We get a lot of diversions.
Mm-hmm.
Like we went to Charleston, South Carolina one time. We were assigned there 3 months because the Navy had developed these. They had a contest going on to develop these patrol boats. There was 4 of them. I remember Republic Aircraft produced one. I forgot who the others were, but they were 4 patrol boats, all built different, small things, 100, 120 feet long. But they all had aircraft engines in it. They all had Packard engines, Rolls-Royce engines, and we were there to keep them going. But they were operating on there. All the Navy ships, they used to come down the East Coast. They used to go chase them and shoot up flares if they got within so many feet. That was a hit, and all that kind of, playing games. But we used to have to work on those things. They used to fire up 5 o'clock every morning, to wonder you could hear them all the way at the other side of town. There are 4 boats all built different. Some
Okay.
riveted, some welded, because they were in a contest to see, who could win the contract to build these boats.
Right.
But then when I got out of there, my fascination with the airplanes was something. So that's when I started flying at Utica Aircraft.
You started flying? You learned how to fly?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Well, I started flying. I went to work for Mohawk Airlines, and then I started flying, and with my GI Bill. Well, in fact, I started flying. I started flying before on a part-time basis, and then I took it seriously, and I finished up with my commercial license when I was working for Mohawk Airlines. And it was tough doing both at the same time.
Learning how
But
to
I
fly and getting your hours in.
And getting my hours in and working for Mohawk Airlines, especially Mohawk Airlines back then.
And you were at the same plant that Bill Sherry
Yeah.
was at? Okay.
Because we used to have rotating shifts and rotating days off, all kinds of crazy things, 4 and 3 days, and then 5 and 2 days. But you had to make sure you get all your hours in, but the rotation was crazy.
And you also started working there before the IAM came in, and
I started there just about when I started working before the IAM came.
so 58, 59.
58.
Okay.
58, I think it was almost simultaneous.
Yeah.
It was almost, when I went to work there, it was almost simultaneous when the IAM came in.
Okay.
From
That would have
the-
been around 59, 60.
59. I came in February of 59, February 1st, 59
Okay.
is when I got there.
Okay.
And I remember them voting on stuff and things like that.
But you weren't really sure what was going on?
No.
Okay.
Not only that, initially when I went to work there, I was more occupied with getting my flying done. That was more important to me than actually being a mechanic.
Right.
I mean, all the mechanic was doing was feeding my flying done.
And were you married yet? Had you met someone yet? Let me look.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. When
Okay.
I got married when I was 25 years old, whatever year that was.
Okay.
55.
Okay.
I got married at 55 to Janine. She passed away.
So you were learning how to, and the idea was that you would earn a living at Mohawk until you got a job as a commercial pilot.
Well, and then things evolved.
Right.
See, I was going to become a commercial pilot.
Uh-huh.
And then I saw so much, well, we all did, so much injustice at Mohawk Airlines. The guy that ran the airline back then, Bob Peach, who subsequently killed himself, he blew his head off with a shotgun right after our strike there, not too long afterwards. But there was so much injustice that I had a big mouth. And before you know it, I was chief steward. And I set up that system more or less myself and Bill. I didn't realize it was going to be so much work. But, I was off the clock. I wasn't doing my mechanics work. I was doing union work. But
And you joined as soon as you could.
Yeah, but I was working 8 hours a day and traveling because we set up a system where when we had a grievance procedure, and every time a grievance got into like a third step, I would have to be present as chief steward. And we had so many grievances and everything. I'd find myself in Albany, I'd find myself in Buffalo, down in New York. I'm traveling all over on the airplane.
And third step, so you would be going to wherever the
Grievance
impartial
hearing.
third party would be to meet with the company and the union. Okay.
Or because what they used to do is that we insisted that because where the grievance we're at that point, that they take at least the third step in that process and take it to the point of origin, so we can have everybody there. Well, we didn't realize that we were going to be doing all the traveling
Right.
to all these different places, and it wasn't no fun because generally speaking, you had to catch the first airplane bright and early in the morning out of Utica, and a lot of times you're going in a different direction to get into a city because of the flight schedule. It was absolutely crazy because especially Utica wasn't the kingpin and a big center for Mohawk Airlines.
So, as chief steward, you traveled a lot. You weren't on the shop floor. You weren't.
I was both.
You were
I
both?
got to say I was both.
Okay. And
And chief steward, that put me right in the middle of negotiations whenever we were negotiating.
and chief steward would have been an elected position.
Yeah.
So, what was your first election like? Did you run unopposed?
It wasn't bad because it was a brand new job. We created it.
Okay.
We created it, not for me because it had a lot of competition.
Right.
Everybody thought it was going to be a gravy job. But,
An easy job. Yeah. And then it wasn't.
It could have been if you wanted to lay back and die. But
Yeah.
you see, back in those days, we were very, very militant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we did a lot of, they seem crazy by today's standards, but I mean, we did a lot of things. Mechanics were very loyal to the union, but mainly, like at Mohawk, for self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't have a good relationship with management. They were very.
We had, let's put it this way, with the one guy, like back then, the industrial relations guy, he understood us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say we had a good relationship, but he understood the labor movement and everything, so he could be a little bit tolerant with us. But the other management in that company, just Bob Peach, the president, I can remember episodes where, I can remember like one episode, I'm sitting in Harvey Barnard's office talking to him, and Bob Peach comes along. They had these big glass windows and these offices. He had his own office, but they had glass there for some reason, and even in the door. So he saw me sitting there, and he run in there, and he says, "That's Peterpaul, right?" And Harvey says, "Yeah." He says, "He's a troublemaker. You fire him right now. You fire him." And Harvey said, "Well, we can't fire him. He's a union guy and leave of absence. He don't work for us." He slammed the door and broke the whole glass in the door.
Wow.
It was fascinating. But a lot of crazy things happened there. But, it followed through. It was sort of a different type of worker back then.
Mm-hmm.
But don't forget, we were making 95 cents an hour, which was pretty good for wages back then. But, the thing that used to bother everybody, that people in the building trades and everybody else was making 50% an hour more. So, but the militancy of it, you could take, like one time, I was late for negotiations for some reason in the headquarters. And the parking lot where we parked was down below by the hangar. And I was going to be late, so I pulled into the circle in front of the place. I jumped out of the car and went in up to Harvey Barnard's office, and I said, "Harvey, listen, let me park my car. I just want you to know I'm here. So you don't think I was not going to show up or anything." I said, "Park my car and I'll be right back." And he said, "Well, wait a minute, I want to talk to you about something." So he talked about 10 minutes. And when I got down below, there was a tow truck going to take my car away. And standing up in the window was Bob Peach and Russ Stevenson, the executive vice president. And so I got the tow truck guy. He said, "What are you doing?" And he says, they called me to tow it away. I says, "You're not going to tow that away." I says, "You're right in the middle here of a labor dispute, this and that." He talked. So he says, "Listen, I'm getting out of here." So, but before he did, Bill was upstairs because he was with me, Bill Sherry, for negotiations. And Bill came out and he said, "What's going on?" He said, "This guy's trying to tow my car, Bill. See him up there?" I said, "I was just going to put it down there, He says, so he goes back and calls. All the mechanics from the hangar came out into the parking lot and were watching my car to see what was going to happen. We had a couple hundred mechanics going out there.
Right.
So the guy took off.
Yeah, sure.
He took off, then I got my car and drove it over and parked.
Yeah.
Mechanics went back to work. And nobody said nothing.
Right.
We're going to fire 200 mechanics?
You can't fire 200
No.
mechanics.
I mean, we had all kinds of incidents like that. When Bill was president of Lodge, and there's John Brusha, I think, was our chief steward then, and he got elected to go to Grand Lodge Convention.
John or?
John Brusha.
Uh-huh.
So he went to the convention, and the company said, the company says you can only have a few days or something. He says, listen, I'm going for a week. That's the month of the convention. So he went. When he came back, they fired him. So he comes to work, goes into the hangar, goes to the shop where he's working. And he says, his boss said, John, I got to send you home. He said, they told me I got to fire you. All the mechanics went home too. They all went home.
Solidarity.
See, that's the way things were done back there. There's a lot of militancy.
Yeah.
Which, we enjoyed. I mean, as labor leaders, you love that, to get that kind of dedication and support.
So you were chief steward, but you never ran, or did you ever run for any other positions at the local level?
No, I was a steward and stuff like that.
Right.
But, then I came up to be chief steward. When we created that job, I went from steward to chief steward.
Okay.
And then from chief steward, of course, I went to general chairman.
Yeah,
in
general
District-
chairman,
in
District
District
Lodge.
147.
147, which I believe started out as 141.
Well, eventually it went to
Eventually it went to 141.
Yeah, 147
Okay.
was Northeast Airlines, Mohawk Airlines, and we had a whole bunch of stuff in the Northeast territory.
Okay. And was that an elected position or
Elected.
elected to? Okay. What was it like running? Do you and let's just talk about that in general. Have you ever faced any real opposition when
Sure.
running, or anybody that you were scared you might not?
Never scared.
You were never scared you might not.
But just that it made it costly. It meant you had to spend money. You don't have a lot of money to make mailings and stuff like
Right.
that. We never paid our general chairman a lot of money. In fact, when I was general chairman 147, we had trouble paying expenses and stuff for traveling because we were pretty broke. But they had to make flyers. Yet, of course, I always visited stations, so that didn't bother me. But and you had to have some debates, which never bothered me.
Okay.
But it was just a lot of money out of your pocket that you could have, spent on your family. But for democracy purposes, you got to run.
Right.
You got opposition.
Right.
But I had a lot of opposition from running for general chairman.
Okay.
I had opposition the first time I ran for vice president. That's about it, I think. Those two positions I had opposition.
Okay.
Strong opposition
Strong
in both
opposition.
of those.
Okay.
I mean, with them producing circulars like mine and stuff like that,
Yeah. Well, did you ever lose any elections, or were you always successful?
No, never lost one.
You never lost. Okay.
Been fortunate.
Okay. So you were elected to general chairman of District Lodge 147. What were your new duties in that position? What?
Well, I was the point man for all the negotiations of the District Lodge contracts. You're responsible to negotiate those contracts. Which
the
is,
contracts that were at Mohawk and the other airlines.
The other airlines,
Okay.
which, it gets, it's time consuming. You got to put out a call for proposals, attend meetings, do all the screening and everything. And then you got to negotiate the contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And also you got to do all the arbitration. It gets pretty involved.
Did you travel a lot with that? Because it sounded like you were traveling some with Chief Stewart, but did your travel?
It was nothing compared to. I think I lived probably almost my whole adult life on an airplane, from when I was a chief steward, not as much as when I was a general chairman. General chairman, I was constantly either on an airplane, arbitration, or negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to Washington as assistant airline coordinator, I wasn't there 2 months. And Bill Wimpinsinger sent me out to California for 7 months to work on a raid we had for the mechanics on United Airlines.
Okay.
So
So that would have been 68 to 70 when you were assistant airline coordinator.
yes.
And tell me about going to California. What part of California?
Most of it was in, it was more than that, but most of it was in Burlingame, the
Okay.
headquarters. We had over 12,000 mechanics
Mhm.
on United Airlines that independent union, the MFA, was raiding.
Okay.
So we had to ward off that raid, but it involved. I spent a lot of time during that 7 months
So you were gone a long time.
Well, and I still had work to do in the office sometimes. A lot of times I'd catch the flight Sunday night. I'd fly to San Francisco, and then Thursday night I'd catch the red eye back to Dulles, spend a day in the office. Then Friday in the office, go home, spend Saturday at home, and most of Sunday, and then go back to the airport 6 o'clock, catch a flight.
So what was it like?
But
so,
I was more.
So,
I had to be a lot. I spent at the big bases:
Mhm.
Chicago, Denver, San Francisco,
Mhm.
a little bit in Los Angeles, but all over the system. But mainly the big areas where I can generate a lot of people, and we can have meetings, answer questions, and all that kind of thing.
So the AMFA was rating IAM shops.
Yeah.
Okay, and I assume it's aerospace, aerospace or
Mhm.
aviation.
AMFA,
Yeah.
that stands for Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association.
Okay.
AMFA.
Okay. And what were the rates like? What's it? Can you talk a little bit about some of their strategies to get in? Do they start by
They
talking?
tried to work from the inside.
Okay.
In other words, these are all mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
We're you. You know, this machinist, don't forget they represent aerospace and all that. They don't care about your interest. You know, that was their whole scheme, that's Big Brother.
Right.
And our whole scheme was, yes, we are Big Brother. That's how we protect you. We got all these interests that we can feed into you. You know, we got a dozen lawyers in our legal department that spend half of their time with the airlines and stuff like that. So we had, you know, it's what happens in politics today.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
Were there ever any points where you thought you were going to lose a shop, or you did lose a shop?
I wouldn't allow myself to think that.
Okay, you went okay,
I wouldn't allow myself.
and then it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, it did happen. Eventually, when I was vice president of transportation, we had about 23,000 in the railroads.
Mm-hmm.
These are that came under my jurisdiction. 23,000 in the railroads. We had over 100,000 in the airlines. About 70,000 of those were mechanics.
Okay.
The rest were ramp service and other things.
And you were general vice president from 73 to 94, so almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Or a little more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So do you have a time frame for the raid you're talking about?
It was right after I got to Washington.
Okay.
The first raid, it was fascinating. I did the first raid.
Okay.
When, let's see, I came in February of 59 to Washington. No, 64.
64?
64.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
At the end of 64, the raid occurred. We counted the ballots in December. So we started, I came in February and I went out to California either May or June.
Okay.
And then 3 years later, I think it was, they came back. Or it could be 4 or 5, I don't know, I forget what that time period, but then I sent Bill Sherry out to do the same job that I did, and he won also.
Okay. Okay. So, for the 4 years that you were general chairman for District Lodge 147, you spent a lot of time in California.
No, not when I was general chairman. When I went to Washington as assistant airline coordinator.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. As assistant airline coordinator. So in 2 short years, you were gone for a really big part of that.
Yeah.
And
So we had an airline coordinator, Frank Heisler. So I was like,
and how do you spell his last name?
Heisler. He was the airline coordinator. Then when I went to Washington in '64, I went as his assistant. And he was a rascal. I still had office work to do, even when I was running around the country, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to be a lot of conflict there because my vice president, Wimpensinger, used to sign me things, and Frank used to get mad. Wimp, I need him here, because he was Wimp. Wimp was his boss too.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, Wimp, I need him here. He said, well, I got to have him over there. And I was torn between the two of them, and I used to have a hell of a time with Frank because he used to take out his scorn on me,
Right.
thinking I was perpetuating this going around. I just wanted to stay home with my family if I could.
Right, but assistant airline coordinator, that job took you to DC, so you had to move
That's
from
the job that took me
from
to DC.
okay, and you moved the family down.
Yep.
Okay. No, but I think it would be difficult to have two supervisors who did not agree on what your priorities should be.
Yeah.
So, well, what other kinds of things would President Wimpensinger? Oh, I guess he wasn't president at the time.
I was general vice president of
He was general,
transportation.
and what would he send you? Why were you the guy he wanted to send out? What?
I think a lot of it, like the first time, I had a pretty decent reputation as a militant, I think, and we negotiated some good contracts, had some really tough strikes, and I was a fresh face. I was in my little corner up in New England, up in the Northeast Territory, where my District 147 basically was housed. The only time they came out of there was really Northwest Airlines, Northeast Airlines, which was also served in Florida. But most of everything was up in that area. So I was a fresh face on the scene. And the war out in California was basically between the old, the new, and all this kind of stuff. You know, if there was something, somebody to blame, there was always something going on. It was a cesspool if I ever saw one. And it was hard for me to grasp because I never saw, people that are supposedly in my profession, trade unions, conduct themselves this way. It was absolutely a wild scene. I mean, to me, it was always about rallying the troops and togetherness. We'll strive to accomplish our goal.
Yeah, and I think the Mohawk plant, just from what you and Bill Sherry have said about it, that was a very special instance of people just really standing together to get things done.
Well, we used to do things that, you got to unite the people. And I mean, it's the small things. I can remember a time when I was assistant airline coordinator again. Bill Wimpensinger says, listen, Chief Stewart on TWA just got fired up in Philadelphia at the airport. He said, John, you got to go up there and we got to try and save this before it gets out of hand. So, jump on an airplane and go to Philadelphia. Make a long story short, because the incident was very minor, but he was Chief Stewart. He was a symbol in the station. And I told the guy, I said, listen, I said, you bring him back, and you bring him back right now. And he says, if you don't, I says, I'm leaving and everybody's going home with me. And he says, you'd never do that? And I said, want to test me? And he calls Dave Crombie, the Vice President of Industrial Relations. And Dave gets on the phone.
Industrial Relations for?
TWA.
For TWA, okay.
Yeah, he was out in, I don't know if he was in New York or Kansas City, but he was the big Mahoff we deal with. So I get on the phone with him and he says, John, you're really serious going to do this? I said, Dave, they're coming out with me right now because this doesn't warrant the firing of the Chief Stewart. So they put him back to work. Nobody went home. And that incident, and I had nothing, I never represented TWA. I had nothing to do with TWA. That was in District 142. But the people in that district, word in the industry, something happens this minute, 2 minutes from now, it's all over the system because of their communication system. And, I was the biggest thing since ice cream. Do you know Peterpaul come in here and what he did with that rotten management of ours? But then it backfires on me because that district lodge, where were they that represented those people? And the guy that was in charge of that district lodge, John Schwinn at the time, they were saying, hey, this is a hell of a note. Peterpaul had to come in from Washington and save jobs, and you're sitting out there in Kansas City having a good time, and it's your job to save our jobs. Wow. So there's some backfiring.
Yeah,
you got to be careful. But that militancy follows you around, and it even gets into government agencies. Like the reputation you gain with the National Mediation Board that, you know, mediates all your disputes and the management of different corporations. You know, it's fascinating, you know, the things that can evolve. And to me, that's why I always, you know, militancy. That's because you look at it now. Look what happened. We represented years ago over 60,000 mechanics. Now we represent in all the airlines that we had all these mechanics. I was on the Bureau of Apprenticeship Training Board, government agency at the time. We had a beautiful apprentice program, 4 years. We had it on Eastern Airlines, TWA, United. There's no such thing as an apprentice program no more. Our almost 70,000 mechanics. Right now we got, I think, around 3,000 on US Air, maybe another 1,000 smattered around someplace. So we've, from 70, we're down to maybe 4,000 mechanics. And don't forget, this is the machinist unit. We started in that railroad pit
in Atlanta.
In your town.
Yeah. So, assistant airline coordinator. It sounds like you did a lot in those 2 short years, which got you the airline coordinator position.
Yeah.
And Frank Heisler moved out of that.
He retired.
Actually, before we start talking about that, can we go back? You mentioned strikes, and it made me think there was a strike at Mohawk while y'all were there.
Yeah.
Like maybe 5 or 6 years after the union came in.
That was, see, I was elected general chairman. I went there at 59. I was elected the general chairman. What year was I elected general chairman there?
You were elected general chairman in 64.
64. That, you should ask Bill this question. That
I did, and that's why I'm following up with you.
Yeah, I know, it was 65. I wasn't too long a general chairman. It had to be 65, 66.
But it was your first big strike.
That was my first big, yeah. And it was over pension.
And it was over pension. So what was it like? What was that time like for you?
That was very difficult. That was in wintertime, right over the Christmas holidays. And you know, when you see pictures about these ancient pictures about union workers, strikes and stuff, you know, Rome, New York and Utica is right up in that snow belt. I mean, back then we used to get 140, 50 inches of snow a year. I mean, you look and here's these big snowbanks, and you see these barrels with a fire in them, and the guys, you know, trying to keep warm with picket signs. Very disheartening. That was very difficult. I always questioned, I shouldn't even say this, but I always questioned my judgment in that and leading them in that direction. But there was so much injustice there. All the other airlines had negotiated paid pension plans with fixed pension plans. They all had negotiated that, and this company refused. They said, no, we'll only pay half. But everybody else was doing it. We're second-class citizens up here. We make less money. We got less benefits. We're going to get less pension too. And I've always been a stickler. Every negotiation I had from the day that I started negotiating to the day I retired, I always put a lot of emphasis on health care and pensions for family purposes. You know, generally speaking, when you negotiate with these carriers, they sit down and they put so much money in the pot that they're going to spend on these negotiations. And they can get a lot of benefits from themselves by putting it in different slots. And I sit there and I got a bunch of mechanics. They want to make a ton of money an hour, especially young guys. I want to prepare them for the future, and I want to negotiate, you know, big pensions, good health care for family and stuff, which takes a big bite on that. And I always had conflict in that area, even in my own mind, but I never changed my venue. I always pursued that. Pensions and health care come before anything. So when I had that Mohawk Airlines strike is when that really started putting me to the test, because it was over a pension thing. And here it is, we had 900 mechanics or whatever it was out in the street over the holidays, families being deprived.
It's cold.
Yeah, for a pension payment. But the people were so angry at that airlines that one of the salvations I had in the whole thing was that they were so angry at the airline it didn't matter almost what I did, because they had venom flowing from them. They had to get even with this carrier. They were tired of getting treated like they were nothing. But anyhow, that started me on my goal that, listen, you got to be tough, because when you're doing business with these employers, these are, I don't know how else to characterize this, but not all of them. You got some nice guys that I bumped into, like a Dan May from Republic and some of these guys. But the majority of them are evil. They cheat, they steal, they swindle, and they do it all on the backs of employees. And they have no feeling, no compassion. So I always felt that way, that these are evil people. And you get all out of them you can. And when you're negotiating, you push them right to the edge of the table. And the key to it all is, and where you got to have good judgment, is don't let it fall off the end of the table, but get it as far to that edge to get the biggest benefit you can for the people you represent. And I've always, used that as a philosophy and as a goal to do that.
And you were successful.
Well, I hope I was to some degree, anyhow.
But specifically with the strike, you were successful.
Yes.
And got them a good pension benefits plan.
Of course, some people measure that as, well, what'd you lose and what'd you gain?
What'd you lose?
We're talking about wages.
Okay.
What'd you gain? The people that I represented were so happy that they got their benefit, number one. And number two, that they felt like we got even with this carrier for what they did to us, or what they've been doing to us.
Did the union have strike benefits at that point?
Yeah.
Or were y'all getting help
I
from
think it was
international?
we're getting $25 a week.
Okay.
And I had a heck of a time with the international.
Really?
Oh.
Were they reluctant to help, or?
Well, they gave me some help. They send up the GLR to periodically, but they thought the strike was sort of ridiculous for what was involved. They didn't have a
You were told that?
Yeah.
By someone at headquarters?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they didn't have a grasp of what was involved. All they seen was this pension program. The workers that were striking seen more than this pension program. A lot more. I think the pension program was probably 25% of the issue.
And you said that because it's really what I've heard is that it's about respect. Because if people are angry enough to go out on strike, it's not so much that they're not talking or that they don't have anything. It's that they feel like you've quit listening. You don't respect the work we do to benefit you. That's the point, and that's what a strike is always really about.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
I think plays a large part in it. There's always this economic thing, but I think that plays a large part.
Well, and you mentioned just in passing earlier that there was a member of management that committed suicide shortly after
About
this.
blew his brains up.
The same guy who had given you such a hard time.
Yeah. Put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger.
So was he just maybe unwell, maybe, or?
Well, he was an egomaniac. He was a.
Did he get fired? Was there something? Okay.
No, what caused it?
Like some sort of trigger?
I think what happened was when Mohawk Airlines merged with Allegheny Airlines.
Okay.
That just about destroyed him because this was his. He felt like he owned it. And all of a sudden, here comes this bigger carrier in that's going to take over all the management and everything else, and he's got to take a lesser role or leave.
Right.
So he put the gun in his mouth and couldn't face that.
Okay.
And I think it blew his ego up.
Right. Okay. Well, you mentioned it in passing. I just wasn't sure how directly involved it was with, but that can be a big transition for some people. They don't know how to handle that. So we were about to start talking about your role as airline coordinator, which you got after you were in there just a few short years after your few short years as assistant airline coordinator, that Heisler retired and you moved on up. So what was airline coordinator like? Well,
I didn't travel as much as I did when I was the assistant, but I did do a lot of traveling. It's you got to. We made it a point that before any strike could occur, that usually I would go in. That I wouldn't let a strike occur with any major carriers unless I can participate to some degree to see what the issue is and see if I could help some to push it over the top. So I had to go into a lot of negotiations, and I got a lot of appointments and elections. I went to the ITF, International Transport Workers Federation. I was a member of their aviation committee and all kinds of things before I got elected to their board. But there was a lot of things. That's when I had to go on the Bureau Apprenticeship Training Board. I was the trustee on a lot of pension plans and health and welfare plans. A lot of administration responsibilities.
Okay. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the international transport workers then? About that, you were there, I guess that was a little later than that. Was 74 to 94.
Yeah.
That was once you were administrative assistant. So, and you were only in the coordinator position for a little over a year and a half.
Yeah, things evolved there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can almost say that when I became the vice president, Wimpy had gone from transportation vice president to resident vice president. And they brought in this GLR for a lot of reasons I won't go into because it's internal politics. But they brought him in from Texas.
Who was it?
Dan Blue.
Okay.
He only stood there several months, and he didn't like Washington, D.C. He wanted to go back home.
Mm-hmm.
So he went back home, and everybody got short-handed then. And he said, what are we going to do for a vice president? And I had some very, very strong support on the executive council. From Gene Glover, Frank, he was secretary treasurer at the time. From Gene, Frank Meager, a lot of the guys came on like gangbusters and said, listen, he should have came in here when you brought Blue. The whole question was, though, look at this kid just got here and look at all the jobs he's had. Mm-hmm. How fast do you move around here? We're not that fast a moving organization. But I think they almost felt like, I think some of them felt like they got boxed in. I know Red Smith, the president of the union at the time, he felt like, he said, well, what are we going to do, Mm-hmm. So they appointed me, and immediately
Okay.
I had an election.
Okay, and that was for administrative assistant?
That was for vice president.
For vice president. Oh, right, because then you were
I was coordinator.
You were a coordinator.
And then I moved, this is when I was administrative assistant.
Okay, and it's administrative assistant, but you only did that for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you were appointed general vice president. So really, you'd only been in Washington 6 years before you.
Possibly.
Thereabouts.
If that's what
I'm
it
looking.
is.
If the dates that I'm looking, if my math is good.
See, I was Wimpy. Wimpy made me his administrative assistant, and then I carried over to Blue.
Okay.
So then when Blue left, who knew anything about the airlines or anything else? Who's sitting there? John Peterpaul. As I said, I had some great support on the council because I did a lot of work for these other officers in their territory, and so they sort of knew me pretty well.
So when you were appointed general vice president, it was transportation for ground workers for railroads and airlines.
And I had a role in the trucking thing too.
Okay, trucking too. Okay.
Generally speaking, the regional vice presidents were in charge, but I had all the coordinating effort and everything that had to be done. Can I excuse myself to go to the bathroom a minute?
Sure. Okay, so we were discussing your appointment to general vice president, and tell me again who appointed you to that position?
Well, the council does.
The council. And what is, for people who might be reading this that isn't familiar with the administrative structure of the IM, who's on the council?
At that time, we had, I believe it was 9. We reduced it after that to 7, but I think at that time it was 9. You had a President Red Smith. You had a Secretary Treasurer. You had a Vice President of Transportation. And then all the rest were regional vice presidents. One in the West, one in the Midwest, one in the East, Southeast, things like that. We divvied up the country.
Okay, so the executive council is essentially made up of like the highest couple
Highest,
of tiers
yeah.
of
It's
administration.
the highest tribunal in.
Okay. And so, was it an appointment with the understanding that following years would be by election, or?
We had election coming right out of the chute. I
Okay.
mean, I was running for the office. I got appointed in December. I was running
Okay.
within a few months. I had to start running.
Okay. Okay. And is that a job you have to run for every year, or
4
is
years.
it every 4 years? And you did that job for a little over 20 years. So you were elected 5 times.
The first time I had opposition,
Okay.
and never had any after that.
Okay. Okay. And so you moved around a lot your first couple of years there, but then you were in the same place for a really long time. What did that job entail? And given that you were there for so long, I'm sure that some of the duties or the work changed over time. So can you talk a little
Oh yeah,
bit?
it changed a lot.
So can you talk a little bit about what you did when you first got there and maybe some of the changes?
Well, when you're vice president, you do everything. You're in charge of everything. The direction of where the airlines or the railroads go is dependent upon you. You know, what input you want to do. If you want to be a lazy rascal and sit back and let it govern itself, then you got big troubles. But if you want to take a leadership role, it takes a lot of effort because you're involved in everything. I mean, you got to make the day-to-day decisions on whether it's organizing, collective bargaining, you name it, and you're responsible for it. And when the council meets and things are wrong, they want to know what you did.
Right.
So, and we took on a lot. I mean, the jobs that I want to have, but I did it for the benefit of the Machinists Union. Like when I got elected chairman of the Railway Labor Executive Association. I needed that job like I needed a hole in the head because it was time consuming. And I was dealing head to head with the presidents, all these egomaniacs of all these other railroad unions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a bunch of them. I mean, whenever we had a meeting, it was the president of every railroad union in the FLCIO.
Mm-hmm.
It could drive you nuts. I mean, but you know, I did that for 2 or 3 years. I forgot what it was. Wasn't that long?
Was that the
time.
Railway Labor
Executive
Association? Yeah, that was 76 to 78. You were chairman.
And you know, we had to coordinate collective bargaining then too,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole bunch of stuff.
Because when you sign a contract with the railroad, everybody signs at the same time, and
The shop
those are
crafts,
those are the biggest contracts we have at the labor archives. They're huge, and they cover so much. And so it was difficult.
Well, this was different than that. I mean, that was a side issue.
Uh-huh,
All our
okay.
shop crafts got together, 5 shop crafts. We tried joint negotiations a couple of times. Sometimes they blew up. Who deserted it? I mean, you know, somebody start with it, then all of a sudden they're in the back room cutting a deal, and it's lesser than what you all agreed to. So they cut the legs out from under you. I mean, you had a lot of that going on. But the RLEA was every union, not just those with the shop crafts. Every union, Brotherhood of Railroad Clerks, the Carmen, the whole bunch of them.
And getting everybody on the same page was difficult.
These are presidents of unions now.
Right. So what were some of the main difficulties? Could you just not agree on the terms of the contract, or did some people want more than other people, or were they?
No, when you take the negotiation with the shop crafts, basically everybody was on the same page when it come to benefits and things like that. One of the things helped blow it up is the side issues, because different crafts had some different issues. You know, those could blow up negotiations. And you'd end up going to the employers and say, listen, solve his problem so that we can all get a solution.
Right.
And we'd run into all kinds of problems like that. In fact, I got in trouble one time with my colleagues because it was the maintenance away. Jeff Zay was in charge of maintenance away at the time. I liked Jeff. Could have been a lot stronger, you know. I remember when he was a lawyer for Bill Mahoney, for Highsaw Mahoney, and then he went over and took over got elected president of that organization. But they treat them like they're the contract workers of the railroads, because all they do is take care of track and everything, and they beat them to death. They contract out work from underneath them, and there's so much disrespect that's pathetic. And he had an issue. I forgot what it was at the time. And Chuck Hopkins was the chief negotiator for the railroad, and everybody had a deal but Jeff. And of course, we're the largest of the shop crafts.
Mm-hmm.
We got the most in machinistry, and I refused to sign it until they resolved Jeff's thing. And I was holding up negotiations because everybody was ready to sign it, and the hell with Jeff. And I said, no, I'm not signing. I'm not signing until Jeff. We come in here with a common goal. And I says, and I believe in his issue. I said, I'm not even, a trainman like he is. I mean, a brotherhood of maintenance away. I says, but I appreciate his issue, and I think he's so right that I said, I got to support him. I'm not signing no deal with anybody until this issue is resolved. I used to get in things like that. That used to give me, this righteous stuff used to give me so much trouble at times.
How did that go over? I mean, did you end up getting what did you end
Members
up?
liked it, but the other unions a lot of times didn't like it.
Right. Huh. Well, and I guess let's talk for a minute, because you were throughout your career with all the different positions you held with the IAM, moving from your local all the way up to headquarters. You were also on the United Airlines. Well, I'm sorry, I'm starting going backwards. The Labor Department Apprenticeship Council from 70 to 73, which would have been in D.C. What did you do? What did you do with them? Was it just a lot of
Which one you mentioned?
the Labor Department Apprenticeship Council?
Oh, the Labor Department Bureau of Apprentice Training.
Okay. Because I know the IAM has a strong apprenticeship program.
We helped negotiate and managed all the apprenticeship programs.
Okay, in for the IAM or in the DC area or?
Mainly it was for all the airlines.
Okay, for all the airlines.
We got involved in issues like a hot issue was when a fella is in the military and it was an aircraft mechanic, and let's say for 3 years, what kind of credit can we give him? Because back then to get an A&P license for the airline to hire you had to have 4 years to take the test. What kind of credit? And it was important because Bureau Apprenticeship Training then could use their influence with the FAA to make these different regulations. So what kind of credit can we give a military guy who worked for 3 years, extensive work on it, into an apprenticeship training program, or directly to get a A&P power plant license with the FAA? So it was issues like that that we were dealing with all the time.
Okay. And you've already talked a little bit about the RLEA.
RLEA.
Then International Transport Workers Federation General Vice President. And it says 74 to 94.
Long time. I was always there. I always had
Who is this its own organization?
Big organization.
And what is it? What is the
Several
sort of
million members.
mission of this organization?
It's actually just like a union. It's a trade union.
Okay.
It's housed in its headquarters in London, England.
Okay.
And it serves all transportation workers.
Okay.
Air, land, sea.
Anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Okay.
We used to meet. We had 2 scheduled meetings a year, plus then you'd have something else, emergencies.
Yeah.
But we always had one meeting at the headquarters in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one, we rotated along them with different countries. Like this fall, we'd meet in Japan. Next fall, maybe Lima, Peru.
Okay.
In places like that.
Okay.
And trying to do it when we had one of the meetings, and we went to a foreign country, we tried to do it in association with some big labor event they had, so we could participate and also perpetuate our own interests.
Right. And were you always in organized areas? Were you always in places where, the Transport Workers Federation, did you assist only union groups, or did you also, was it also for workers who maybe were not parts of you?
Oh, we always tried to organizing,
Okay.
And like with the seafarers. At that time, there was Paul Hall, and along Sharman, Teddy Gleason, work very closely with them. We try to establish these seamen. They're almost like a hotel at these different ports. So when these seamen come off the ships and stuff, they have a place to go and something to do. We try to put them in different ports all over, whether organized or not, just for the benefit of the seamen. We did a lot of things like that, a lot of organizing.
Okay.
Got involved deeply too in democracy. I was supposed to go to like Colombia. I had to laugh at that because at that time down in Colombia they were kidnapping everybody. And it was about workers' rights in Colombia. And myself and Teddy Gleason were supposed to go. We got canceled out, and under my breath I was happy because, like I told my wife, I says, can you imagine a little dumpy Italian union leader going down to Colombia? I said, I wonder what the heck he's going to be worth when they contact the government.
Well, let's go ahead and finish talking about these sort of external positions you held outside, and then we'll come back and finish up with General Vice President. So you were President Clinton National Airline Commission during '93.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun?
Yeah.
Because the way you look doesn't really tell me that you thought it was a lot of fun.
It was very difficult. I was swimming up a river all by myself because you had at that meeting, on that commission, when you look at the members.
Well, what was the purpose of putting this commission together?
Bill Clinton put it together because the airlines were in a mess. And you'll see the name of the commission, I can't remember it all, but this big long name. It was supposed to solve all the problems in the airline industry. And it was commissioned to do something. But on the commission, you had Steve Wolf from Chairman of United Airlines. What was his name from American Airlines? I fought with him so much. But you had all these guys, all the chairmen of these airlines, president of the airlines, sitting around this table.
Were you the only union representative?
Well, you might as well say that because the other guy was a pilot.
Alpha.
Yeah, Alpha.
Okay.
Randy Babbitt was there, and like I told him, he should have stayed home because for all that mattered to me, the pilots, they weren't helping our cause at all. But well, as a result of it, I'm the only one that disagreed with the commission. That's when I wrote that report.
Okay.
Randy Babbitt signed it, but I had more arguing and fighting, and these guys were highly educated guys, but they had no sensitivity to workers or anything like that. That was that evil people I'm talking about.
Right.
I hate to characterize it as that, though. But anyway, that's the way I felt. That was a very difficult task. And I had a difficult time writing that report, and I had to use 3 or 4 guys to help me outside. I mean, everything in there is my ideas and what I wanted to say, but to phrase it right, I had problems with that because I had to put it in an educated form. Right. Which I'm usually, nuts and bolts person.
Yeah.
I'm not that type of writer.
Right.
So I had to have help write.
And for any future users of the oral history, just they can know that a copy of that will be
that's public record.
Available in the archive, and it's a public record as well. So
just that when I printed that, it was funny because I did that black cover, and our printer Kelly at the time, the union printer, he says, John, this is tough to make this black. He said, you know how much ink and everything? He says, you can't use black paper with white. You got to use white paper and then blank with black. And so I says, I got to have black cover because that portrays what I'm saying.
Well, did the commission overall accomplish what it was tasked to? Okay.
I don't think it accomplished anything.
Okay. Was its lifespan just the maybe 6 months that I see here, or did it continue on?
It was supposed to, but it only went about 6 months, and that was the end of it.
Okay.
You had all these presidents of these airlines. Do you think they were going to agree on anything?
No.
They don't agree on anything in life. What are they going to agree sitting around the table?
Right. And so, y'all came together just to come up with better ways to make the airlines function or
function better,
in a
economically feasible.
cooperation more,
But
okay.
we got into everything.
Mhm.
We got into manufacturing,
Mhm.
as you'll see in the report. We got into not only the airline operation itself, but the manufacturing of airplanes and everything. And back then, at that time, the only airline getting, British Aircraft Corporation, the consortium with the French and the British, was the only one getting subsidized. And it was so unfair. They were actually bidding contracts and selling their airplanes, the U.S. carrier against Boeing. And Boeing couldn't compete because they were subsidized with the British airplanes, the AC-111 and all those.
Mhm.
And so I got into that in my report too.
Right. And did President Clinton, it was his commission, but do you know what his reaction was to what happened with the commission? Did you ever
I never,
hear anything?
Never heard anything. I don't remember. Of course, he gave it a favorable report
Mm-hmm.
that that he appreciated everybody's work and you got to strive to do these things, whatever the recommendations were. I had to laugh because somebody told me, and I'm trying to remember who it was, that they mentioned in a meeting in the White House about the minority report, my report.
Uh-huh.
And they asked Clinton, did he read it? He says, I did. He said, that's very interesting. He said, but man, I can't do it. He says, I don't care if I agree with anything there. There's nothing I can do with it.
Politics, yeah. Well, you were General Vice President for Transportation, ground transportation, when a lot of important things happened, including deregulation of the airline industry in the late 70s. So can you talk a little bit about that, your feelings about that?
I testified more times about deregulation in Congress before the Civil Aeronautics Board. I was totally against deregulation because I felt it would perpetuate itself to the big would eat the small.
Mm-hmm. And what's happened?
And they put a lot of airlines out of business and stuff like that. It's all happened. I mean, I testified, I don't know how many times back in those days before Jimmy, he got beat, was head of the House Aviation Committee, Jimmy, congressman from out west. Something, I can't remember that. And also in the Senate. But I appeared so much before them. I used to have a lot of fun with that. That's one of the things I enjoyed is appearing, because I used to have a lot, when I testify, one of my biggest antagonists was a congressman. His name was, it rhymed with Messerschmitt.
Okay.
So I used to call him Messerschmitt. He said, my name's not Messerschmitt. I said, I'm sorry. 2 minutes later, I says, well, Congressman Messerschmitt, he's the drug nut. But, I see it also that it's almost like a farce in a lot of sense, because I think I was the only guy that when I say something or I didn't have a document or something about it, they'd ask me to supply it, I'd supply it. But everybody else that testified that you supplied this, yeah, I'll supply it. I go to find their document, nobody ever supplied any documents or followed up on anything.
Right.
I was the only one.
Right. So, did you feel like it was important in your role as General Vice President in the IAM to be a person testify, or were you asked to, or did you volunteer, or did you insist that they hear your side of things?
We were generally speaking asked, because we had such a constituency and we had such big mouths, because we did have some support. And those that supported us on the committee weren't going to let a hearing go without bringing us there.
Right.
Because they knew what our position would be beforehand. In fact, a lot of them used to supply us with information that we could use in our testimony. So, generally speaking, we were invited.
Okay.
We were invited to the commission.
Okay.
Clinton's commission.
Okay.
He wanted labor on there.
Right.
And he was told, listen, bring the machinist. And so,
How do you prepare to talk, and like what would be like in-house at the IAM to prepare to go in front of Congress? What I mean, because I know part of it's the day-to-day and just what you know because of your day-to-day
Right.
work. But do you have people who sit you down and say these are the key points, or that help you?
Would you believe 90% of it is experience, really?
Really?
It's what you're encountering on the job,
Mm-hmm.
and taking that and putting that to words,
Mm-hmm.
and you go to the books when you need some facts and figures.
Okay.
But other than that, and I always found out that I never wanted somebody to do this for me because they weren't using my language.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be, not vulgar or anything, but sort of layman, sort of earthy, to express
Colloquial.
myself. Yeah, I represent workers. I want to be one of them.
Yeah.
And I want to show them that, hey, listen, this is a worker here
Mhm.
that knows what's going on and trying to tell you.
Instead of using language they might
Yeah,
not
when I used to get
understand.
sometimes a lawyer or one of our lawyers or something write something for me, I had to redo it all because I couldn't even, from with a written text, I didn't even know where to put the punctuations or where to pause or anything like that. I had to do it myself, then I knew
Mm-hmm.
the way I wrote my speeches and stuff. Because most of them I did longhand on an airplane, and I wrote them in phrases, so I knew when to stop, when to continue, where to put emphasis. Where I wanted to put an emphasis on something, I'd put a little star there, bang it home. So it's the way I usually have prepared for it. But I think it's all experience mainly. When you've been around that long, and you have all these experiences, and it's easy to talk about. It's easy to talk about a plight of a mechanic. It's easy to talk about how the airline conducts itself when you're, dealing business with them every day of the week. I mean, it's you know what's going on, and you know where the evil is. You get big disappointments. I'll never forget that when Carl Icahn took over TWA. Boy, this got me. I told him, I says, I got to know Carl Icahn a little bit, and I said, Carl, why do you want, airlines don't make no money? And I says, you're a money hog. I says, airlines don't make no money. I says, why do you want this airline? He was fighting to get control of it. He said, John, we did some paperwork on it, and he says, I see all this revenue coming in the front door. He says, you know how much money? I said, I know how much money they take in every year. He says, well, and what's coming out of the back door for the shareholders is nothing. But all this money coming in here, nothing going out here. He said, let me tell you something. There's that big chunk of money. I want to get my hands on it. He says, and I think I can get my hands on that money and make a lot of money. And he did. And the way he did it was he bought that airline, well, he got control of it.
Mm-hmm.
He sold everything that wasn't bolted to the floor. He'd sold tugs on the ramp. He sold all the equipment and everything, and then leased it back, and then let it go in bankruptcy. That's the way they operate.
Yeah. Huh.
That's like, not to be political, like a Bain Capital is a Carl Icahn. That's what they do. These corporate, whatever, I forget what you call those now. Those investment companies like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he put right up front what he was going to do. Everybody knew it. Got away with it.
And the president that was so pro-deregulation, Jimmy Carter,
Yeah.
or maybe not pro-dereg, but it happened during his administration.
Yeah. I think he just did nothing. He didn't. The main propeller of that was Khan. I can't remember his first name. He was a member of the CAB. Boy, he and I crossed swords. I can't remember his first, but his last name was K-A-H-N. They call him the father of deregulation. Because he lasted for years. Even when deregulation was proven to be a failure, he was still out there supporting it. Albert Kahn.
Albert.
Or Alfred. One or the other. Albert or Alfred Kahn.
Okay. And were you politically involved at that level in terms of the machinists and who they were backing? Because I know that
We always were. We machinists are very
Yeah.
political.
Yeah, but I mean, were you personally involved with, because Carter running again, but Kennedy
Yeah.
also trying to be on the Democratic ballot, and then
I had to introduce Carter. We have our machinist nonpartisan political league, and we invite all the candidates to speak at our MNPL. I was the junior council member at the time. So a council member has to introduce the candidate. And it was funny because I had to introduce Jimmy Carter because nobody else did. He's not going to win nothing. What's this? You do it, Peterpaul. You're low on the totem pole. So I did some homework on the guy, and I wrote. They said I had to do 5 minutes introduction, and they want everybody to do 5 minutes so it looked like you're treating everybody fairly. I did the 5 minutes, and when I got through, and he came up to the podium, he shook my hand. He was like dumbfounded. He just looked at me and couldn't say a word. So I went back and sat down, and he watched me as I went and sat down. And then I couldn't figure out what that was all about. Then his guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, I want to thank you for that introduction. He says, you dumbfounded, he said, the candidate. He said he'd never heard words about him like that before.
what did you say?
I don't remember. But, I just, you give him praise. I mean, he's a candidate.
Right.
He's a Democratic candidate.
Right.
So you praise him.
Okay. Now, was this
This
the
was in the primaries. Now, this is not, this is when they were all stumbling over each other.
Was this when he was going up for re-election, though?
No, this was initial.
The first one. Okay.
Yeah, this is the first time out of the
All
chute. No.
Okay, that makes a little more sense than him being dumbfounded.
No, I never had any conversation or dialogue with him after that. Just that introduction
Okay. Yeah.
to our conference.
Okay.
But if you ever saw the dumb look on his face.
Well, and then I know the machinists again. When Carter was going up for re-election, but Kennedy also threw his hat in the ring for nominee Ted Kennedy. But Reagan won, and of course, Reagan might not have wooed the machinists, but he definitely wooed the air traffic controllers, and fired them this month, 31 years ago. Do you have any?
They got what they deserved for support.
Or I was going to say, do you have anything to say about that? And clearly you do. So it's just always interesting for me to hear from other union people about that, because I hear a lot from historians or people who are working on their papers or their dissertations, and I've talked to some of the PATCO guys too. But it's always interesting. And then of course, if you talk to Republicans, they say they got what they deserve. Not for that the reason you stated. And then if you talk to Democrats, they say, oh, the poor air traffic controllers, they should have never been fired. But other union people...
They shouldn't have been fired. But I mean, I'm being facetious when I say that. But I got upset when they endorsed it.
Mm-hmm. Because they made it very public.
I couldn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand things like that.
Mm-hmm.
When working people do crazy things. Of course, in Florida here, all the working people do crazy things here. I don't understand Florida myself.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a sorry situation.
Mm-hmm. Over 11,000 people. Mm-hmm. And then, perhaps more directly related to the machinists, what that seemed to do was give corporations a little more, made them less afraid to deal with strikers the same way that the federal government had, which leads us up to, if you don't mind talking about, the Eastern strike.
I got to reflect my memory on that. But,
Mm-hmm.
that was a long, long time ago. But I was deeply involved in that. That's
23 years, 23.
I spent a lot of time in Florida. On that strike, they had to do a lot of behind-the-scenes things. Because quite candidly, my front man was always Bill Sherry. Bill Sherry.
Okay.
Bill was in negotiation across the table and everything. Charlie Bryan couldn't do it himself. In fact, truth be known, Bill Wimpelsinger didn't. He wished he could have took Charlie Bryan out of it, but Charlie Bryan was popular with the people. He had to keep Charlie Bryan in the forefront. But Bill was the control, more or less, of Charlie Bryan. We had to keep Charlie, so it didn't get to be a disastrous situation. But all the serious stuff was done with Frank Borman. Like when they were negotiating with...
Because the strike started when Frank Borman was still in charge.
Yeah.
And it only later went to Lorenzo.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
But anyhow, during all those... It seems like we were negotiating down there with Borman for 100 years. And Bill Ushery, my buddy Bill Ushery.
He's a good guy.
Like when they were negotiating at the Diplomat Hotel, there was Eastern Airlines, and Dwayne Andrews was in charge of Eastern Airlines. Charlie Bryan and Bill were over in the hotel. I was across the street in the motel with Frank Borman. And they'd send over issues and stuff, and then I'd argue with Frank, what to do about it, and then he'd send it back. And, he was cagey. He'd tell Dwayne, now make sure you fight like hell, but then give in like a good guy, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there was things you couldn't... Bill used to get upset with Charlie Bryan because you couldn't settle an issue with Charlie Bryan. If 10 was on the table and the company wanted to give 4, and they compromised with 7, and everybody agreed, the next day Charlie would come back and want 10. The company Frank Borman and I don't know how else to say it, just wanted to refuse to do business with him because he didn't have any trust in Charlie, which made the whole thing difficult. Of course, then when you get to Lorenzo, that's altogether a different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a lot of tough times there. I had tough times with Frank too. I can remember one time in his office. We were upstairs and he's got a desk like this. His desk is an open desk. Beautiful, like French design, one of these flimsy things with 4 legs, And I'm with Bill Ushery in the hallway. And Bill's, they're talking about givebacks. There was no strike at the time, just negotiating, talking about givebacks. And he says, Frank says he's got to buy airplanes. He's got to buy, I forgot what, it was like 21 or something airplanes. I says, you serious, Bill? He says, yeah. So I said, we got to go and talk to him. So we go in his office. And I said, Frank, he just told me this. Yeah, I got to have those. I said, you can't afford to pay the bills. You can't do nothing. And you're talking about spending how many millions of dollars, new airplanes? I said, you're out of your goddamn mind. And I beat on the table. I hit my fist. The table broke in half. It broke in half. He jumped. Usher didn't know what to do. He jumped up screaming at me and everything, walked out of the office and left me all alone in there. And all these guys were standing in the hallway because my guys were on the other end. And his guys, they were taking a break because we were talking. And they're out in the hallway going, what the hell is going on here? And they see me in the office there standing up and Frank running down the hallway screaming. And Usher don't know what to do.
Right. I would have known what to do.
So I just walked back to my guys and they said, what happened, John? I said, we just had a dispute. He wants to buy airplanes, and I says, they just can't see it with his financial condition, irrespective of what the competition is.
Right. Well, did you ever deal with Eddie Rickenbacker?
No, that's...
You didn't? Okay.
No.
Okay. Because something that Bill said in his interview, Bill Sherry, was that Eddie Rickenbacker really understood airlines and understood how to run an airline.
Yeah, well, he had a good reputation.
And and then Borman.
Borman was a last resort.
I'm sorry. I've done a lot of interviews in the last 2 days. It could have been one of my other interviews, but someone in the last 3 interviews I've done in the last 2 days said that. So, and I'm attributing it to Bill Sherry, but he may not have been the one.
Borman came there. He was an astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing about Frank is he was an astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
They needed that figurehead. They needed that publicity because it was done. Before it started all this negotiations and ended up with Lorenzo, the airline was basically in deep trouble. It would take almost a miracle to pull it out. and they try to rely on the employees to do it. And the employees did make a great sacrifice down there. But you couldn't expect the employees to go as deep as they wanted them to bail the airline up, because they would have been working for almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was mission impossible right from the very start. And I don't think Frank wanted this. Frank knew Lorenzo's reputation,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody else would step in there, and he was desperate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He was desperate, and he had stockholders on him, and that's how Lorenzo got a hold of it. But Borman was a character. I sort of liked him.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was avoiding him. We were in Washington in the Embers, and I'm with our Eastern Airlines negotiating committee that came into town. We were talking, and he had called me. I got to talk to you. I'm in town. I said, Frank, I can't talk to you. I can't do it now. I said, maybe later tonight or something. I can't. I got to do it now. I said, I can't. I said, Frank, that's it. I can't talk to you now. This and that. So I'm meeting with Jimmy Cates and the Eastern Airline guys. This was before Charlie Bryan. So we go across the street. Charlie Bryan defeated Jimmy Cates and took that job. So we go across the street to the Embers restaurant. We're sitting about a big round restaurant. There's 7 or 8 of us. We go out to Borman. He said, I got to talk to you. I said, Frank, I'm busy in a meeting right now. In the restaurant, a lot of people. I got to talk. He puts his foot on the arm of the chair and stands on the table in the middle of the restaurant. I told you, I got to talk to you now. So we went back on the table in the corner and talked. I forgot what it was about or anything else. But crazy, I used to get a kick out of him.
Yeah. Well, before he turned the airline over to Lorenzo, did you ever deal with Lorenzo when he was in Texas?
Very faintly in Texas. I think I had 1 or 2 conversations with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards, after all, I never talked to him during the strike or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
He was untouchable. He was so well protected. Then after it was all over with, years go by, I get a call to have lunch with him. I forgot where it was.
Were you still with the union?
I was vice president.
Okay.
He wanted to have restaurant, I forgot the restaurant over in Georgetown, Four Seasons or something. I says, all right. He said, I got to do it at breakfast if you don't mind, John. This and that. So I said, all right. I said, I'll see you there in the morning. So I said, what time, Frank? He says, 9 o'clock. I said, all right. So I go over there, and when I walked in the restaurant, his guy was standing there. He had another guy standing over by it. He had armed guards. And he wanted to get back in the airline business. I forgot what he wanted to do. It was very iffy, but he had a couple of things on his mind. And I says, Frank, let me just be honest with you. I said, I don't appreciate even being here. And I says, I don't appreciate you even asking me this. I said, because there's no god darn way in hell that I'd give you any bit of help. I said, if you were laying in the street dying, I says, I wouldn't give you a breath of air. I says, you're an evil person, and I can't help it. I said, I never will help you. And I got up and walked out.
I'm not sure why he thought you would be the person to call to ask him.
Well, that was an airline guy, and he was looking to try to circumvent the union somehow. So I don't understand the man myself. The guy that done business with them, though, was fascinating. Down there on, what airline was that? He had in Texas, the local service carrier. But the guy dealt business.
Was it Texas Air?
Could have been something like that. But the guy dealt business with him down there, Laney Rogers. We used to negotiate for District 146, I think it was. I forgot it was Laney or JD, but one or the other. They used to have they said they had a decent relationship with him. Used to get pretty decent contracts, but not when he moved to Eastern.
So what impact did that have for the IAM, like losing all those jobs?
Oh, that had a big impact. Because you're talking not only about jobs, you're talking about people being out of work in the Florida economy. Especially back then, a lot of it was seasonal. And one of the most stable, even though it did fluctuate, one of the most stable was the airlines. Because you just can't park an airline and lay everybody off and then say, well, come on back in the fall, fellas.
Right.
You can't do things like that. So it was critical to the community. But most of it was in the smaller communities that really hurt. But most of it was in Miami, where there's a bigger aviation community to help absorb a lot of those people. So, but still, it's a sad situation, especially when you get like that.
Well, do you think the membership saw maybe weakness in the IAM because they weren't able to get to a good contract, or do you think it was widely recognized that the problem was?
No, they recognized that. Everybody knew it was a financial problem.
Yeah.
In fact, everybody knew too that Charlie Brown used to come to meetings. They'd stand up and clap and everything else, but all the leadership and everything down there, they knew that it was a mission impossible and that he was blowing a lot of air. The rah, let's go get him. There was nothing to get.
Right. At that point, there was nothing to get. Okay. And then moving ahead a little, NAFTA. So you were on Clinton's National Airline Commission, but also he worked hard to pass NAFTA, which I know that in general organized labor was not happy with. So can you talk about perhaps the difficulty of having a Democratic president who wants to do something, who had the support of labor to get elected, and then who wants to do something that labor is against?
But that was more or less, we played a role in it, but that was more or less out of our hands. That was, the FFL, the presidents of all the unions, they're the ones that gave, really shook the sabers on that one. We didn't have much to do with that, other than rallying our troops, write letters, and get out your protest.
To no avail.
Yeah, the big dialogue had to come from the Federation and the Executive Council and all the union presidents.
Okay.
We do have some limitations down in the middle of the hierarchy list.
Okay. And anything else about your time as General Vice President? Because I had a few very specific questions because you covered so much time. But is there anything that we didn't cover? Maybe strikes other than Eastern, or any other big administrative or
No, there's just so many incidents.
Legislative.
I don't know
where to start?
Yeah, there's just so many. The different episodes we had and the relationships, like with Republic Airlines and all these other situations and instances that. Don't forget I was around for 50 years.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I'm remembering what I am. I gotta tell my wife because she says I can't remember nothing.
Well, but you said the job itself changed over the 20 years that you held it.
Well, not that much with me. Because I kept the same path and things, but I saw it mainly when Bill took over. Because I was I saw that after I had left. Because when I retired, George Corpus come to me and says, you got to be on the board of directors of United Airlines.
Yeah.
I says, no, I don't want to be on the board of directors of United Airlines. He says, you got to be on the board of directors of United Airlines. You know all about these ESOP programs, stock options. He says, you're the ones that's negotiated all that with TWA and all those people. He says, or the employee thing with United Airlines. He says, you've got to go on the board. And I says, and I wasn't feeling good because I just had heart surgery. So I says, all right, because I negotiated. George called me back. I was out on sick leave with heart surgery. George calls me and says, I want you in negotiations in United Airlines. I had to go down to Georgetown, and I don't know why they went down to a hotel there and negotiate. And boy, that was the roughest negotiation I had in my life, because every time we break, they were going around the clock, but every time we get a couple hours, I'd run to my room and try and get a nap or something. I was just so frustrated and hurting so bad. But we got through it, and then after that was the board thing. I negotiated the board thing, so he says, you got to take the board thing. I said, I don't want the board thing. I've had too much. I said, I want to go home. He said, I don't want nothing to do with anything. But I did.
And you did it for 8 years, it looks like.
Yeah, and you know something, it was quite an experience. I'm sort of glad I did it, especially after I got more of my health back. It was an experience dealing with these CEOs from all these other industries. I wish I had taken notes and had the capabilities to write a book or something, because it gave me such an insight into other people, other industries, the way they think. It was probably the greatest education I ever got serving on that board. Had a lot of good experiences, a lot of bad experiences on that board. Bad experience with the USA merger, when they tried to merge them. United Airlines had a lot of smart people, and I forgot the name of the guy, the scheduler, but he had showed me if this merger came about, then US Air was in trouble. US Air was my airline, that's where Mohawk Airlines had ended up. And I looked at that and I said, boy, I wish we could do something with it. And I didn't perpetuate this. United did it because they wanted the Northeast Corridor mainly. And that was, you know, that was US Air. So I put my foot in the water and I said, I think it's a good thing. When he showed me this route over system, put United over US Air and look at these routes and the competition, I mean, they were going to put everybody else out of business if it ever materialized. You had American flying a couple flights a week, like from Boston to Seattle. With the feed-in US Air had, they could swamp that market. They know how many people leave every city, every airline, every city. They know it down to the passenger on the average. It would have been a tremendous merger. But then the economics caught into it all. Mm-hmm. And the main opposition I had was from the pilots. They were worried about the seniority list. Pilots said, well, you know, US Air's got too much seniority. They'll knock us out of all our airplanes. And that was really something. But I hung in there, and I ran in. My position there got me off the board of United Airlines, because the United mechanics and United pilots, they ended up joining forces, especially out in San Francisco, mm-hmm. and the major base. And they joined forces, and they said, listen, and Rick Dubinsky, the pilot, a guy used to call him Mad Dog Dubinsky, they were blaming me for it all. And when I got back to Tommy Buffenberger, that, listen, back your guy off of the US Air merger. So Tommy called me and he said, listen, they want you back. I said, Tommy, I'm not backing off. It's the right thing to do. It's the right conditions. A month later, I was gone. He says, listen, I got to take you off the board. We're having a war out here in California. They're rebelling. I'm afraid of another AMFA raid. Can't do it. So then I left the board. But the only plus I got out of all of that, I can never forget it, that two guys, trying to remember their name. This was Dick. He was the chairman of the big telecommunications company out in Denver. And John Mac from Chase Manhattan, chairman of Chase Manhattan. John McGillicuddy and Dick, I can't remember his last name, but anyway, we're out west. And we had a board meeting, and it was obvious that the US Air thing couldn't materialize because of the financial data. And they come up to me, and a lot of times, you got to remember, a lot of times we fought like hell. This is another situation. I'm the only guy there, me and the pilot. Pilot's a waste. Flight attendants had a guy there, but he was a lawyer. They picked that just another United Airline guy, more or less. They said, listen, we got to have a drink with you. I said, what the hell do you guys want now? So we go in the bar, and I sit down, and they both stand up, and they said, we got to do this standing up. And so I stood up, and they both shook my hand. And they said, John, we never met anybody like you. I said, what are you talking about? I said, what evil thing you got plotted here? They said, no, listen, everybody, the workers and everything are against this merger, but you stood for it all the way through. You've jeopardized yourself because we know deep down you felt it was the right thing to do. And we've had we've had a wrong impression of you since the day we met you. They says, and McGillicuddy told me this, he says, I don't like meeting guys. He said, but he said, I want to tell you something. You're probably the best I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen anybody like you. It was sort of flattering.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, my response was, listen, coming from you two guys, it means nothing. Because I wasn't going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I appreciated that. But that caused my demise. My demise. I didn't want to be there to begin with.
Right. You finally found a way out.
Maybe it was a favor. I don't know, but anyway.
Okay. Well, we have talked a long time today.
Yep.
Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to mention?
No, went all the way now for the next couple of days, I'm going to be remembering things.
That always happens.
You refreshed my memory.
Well, if you're at the Grand Lodge Convention, it would be possible maybe for us to do a follow-up.
I don't know if I'm going to go there.
Okay.
The trip is a pain in the neck, especially out of Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pain in the neck. I got to see if my wife convinces me to go.
Okay. Well, is there any person, maybe a mentor or somebody who sort of was there along the way with you that you could always rely on, that you want to say a few words about? Okay.
Two guys.
There's always somebody.
Two guys. Bill Bill and I started as mechanics together.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always done my best to perpetuate his interest. He's a solid citizen in trade unions. And Frank Wallner.
Frank Wallner?
My administrative assistant.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, you want to talk about loyalty? There's nobody any more loyal, almost like servitude.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, he was with me for years, and there was nothing I couldn't ask him he wouldn't do. We fought and argued a lot because I always gave him the latitude for him to give his opinion. Whether he agreed with me or didn't, I always used to solicit at first. Then afterwards, he used to volunteer it. But I trusted him very, very deeply. He was my political advisor. If I had something that was very confidential, that needed a lot of work and stuff, he was always my guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you look, because a lot of people say, John, you move pretty fast here. I think one of the reasons I moved so fast is because of the support I had, basically from those two guys.
Okay.
A lot of people say, well, Wimpensingher was your sponsor and all of that, but to a lot lesser degree than these guys were my perpetuators. So in fact, when it came to replacing me as vice president, I had to laugh because Corpus told me at the time that, who do you think? And he mentioned two names. He mentions Wallner and Sherry. Mm-hmm. And I said, I got to look at this pretty good, George. From a practical viewpoint, I like one. Mm-hmm. From a different viewpoint, I like the other. I told him, I said, but, I need a day or so. I said, but to be honest with you, I says, I'm leaning towards Bill. And he says, well, I'm leaning towards Frank. So I said, so be it. And I go downstairs. I've never talked to Frank at all about succession or anything like that. And he comes in my office and he says, let's get one thing straight. He says, I don't want your job. I'm never going to take it. If you ask me, I'll refuse. He says, because I'm going with you. He said, when you leave, I want to go too. He said, I got enough till he stayed a little longer. Then he finally left. But he says, there's no need. He said, I got the time, I'm worn out. He said, I've done all the good I can to the Machinist Union. He says, I won't have my heart into it after this. So he said, I might as well go home and relax. He said, I'm going with you. He says, go home and relax. Just a matter of catching up with you. So next day I went upstairs and told George, I says, well, your candidate is gone. I said, my candidate wins. So anyway.
Okay. That's a nice story. I think they'll both be pleased to read your transcription.
Who's going to read this?
Yeah, everybody. Researchers and
You don't do it verbatim, do you?
machinists. Oh, certainly we do.
Do you do it verbatim?
Yes, we do. Yes, sir. I told you up front, don't say anything you don't
All right,
want
you
on the
didn't tell me
record.
that.
Well, thank you so much for joining
Yeah.
us today. I appreciate it.
Well, been very candid with you, so